Hey, it's Dan here. Today we're talking about the Haas Effect, which you have probably seen on videos before, but I'm going to dig a little deeper into the technical side of it and explain some of the processes and side effects of using this technique, as well as share some more specific settings which I have found to be effective. The Haas Effect is a psychoacoustic concept which was discovered by Helmut Haas in the late 1940s. It's a technique which can be used as a means of overcoming what we call directional masking in recordings, where one sound obscures the apparent direction of another. In addition to this, it's also a technique for creating depth from a mono sound without using reverb. My favourite use of this technique is as a means of giving an instrument authoritative directionality and focus regarding its placement in the stereo field, as I'll explain as we go. But first, let's talk about Haas's findings. Haas determined that the human hearing system gathers information about the direction of a sound by the differences in arrival time between each of our ears. For example, a sound source which is closer to our left ear will be perceived as such because the direct sound reaches our left ear first, and then a short time later, a reflection of the original sound bounces off a nearby surface on our right side and back into our right ear. Our brain does the math on the short time difference between our ears and determines that the sound is coming from our left side. The brain also uses this and other reflective information to determine what the size of the environment is that we are in. All of this is processed instinctively as a useful survival mechanism, for example, as a means of determining if a predator is behind us or not and how far behind. The brain locates the sound as coming from a single direction, based on the arrival of the first sound, despite many instances of reflections which follow throughout the rest of the sound. Because of this instinct and the way our brain processes this information, our ears can't help but latch onto the very first sound we hear, much like the McGurk effect. Likewise, by taking a single sound source, which is mono, and copying that to an additional track with both sides hard panned, with a very short delay added to one side, we can give the impression of an instrument being positioned to one side of the room or the other. With the Haas effect, we are effectively emulating the first reflections of an acoustic environment. The brain takes in this information from the original and delayed track and gives us feedback about the location of the sound and the space that it's in. Haas found that the brain was unable to separate a sound from its reflection regarding delay times less than 40 milliseconds, but anything over that amount is distinguishable as two different sounds. In practice, very small delays are useful for creating panning effects, and longer delays create more depth up until the 40 millisecond mark. Now you might ask, haven't we already got a method for making the sound come from one side or the other? It's called panning. But it's worth noting that panning an instrument happens as a result of the volume differences between the left and right speakers. As one speaker becomes louder, the sound is perceived as moving towards the louder speaker. But achieving this movement with volume alone may not be the effect you are going for. For instance, you probably spent a great deal of time meticulously setting your pan pots on every instrument in a mix, only to find that the guitar you pan 20 increments to the left side still kind of sounds like it's in the center. This traditional method of panning can at times be a bit vague, except towards the extreme left, right, and center, which is why some people prefer to use the LCR panning method, because it only uses these three mixing positions. The directionality of a sound can be more obvious when we use the Haas effect. From studies that have been carried out, delay times on the delay track between 0.1 and 0.7 milliseconds have proven to be very linear when moving from the center. As we increase the delay by 0.1 millisecond increments, the instrument can be easily identified as panning in small steps and seems to be more accurate than the traditional pan pot. In this example, I'm going to demonstrate these delays one by one so you can hear the increments, and we'll also compare this to traditional panning. Okay, so I'll just explain what we've got going on here. We've got one guitar here, which I've duplicated, and I've also got them hard panned left and right. And I've got a delay plug-in here, which is just the standard DigiDesign one. And we're just going to change a few settings here. We want 100% of the mix. We want to change, we'll just pull down the delay to 0 for now, and the depth will pull that down as well. And same with the rate. And what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate that and bypass it. And on this one, we're going to automate it so that we can bring it up here. This makes it a bit more accurate because if we type in 0.7 here, it comes in 0.71. So it's up to you. If you want to type it in that way, you can do it that way. Or what I prefer to do is do it with automation. So here we go. I'm going to set it up so that we've got 0 delay, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7. And we're going to look at some longer delays here. Okay. Okay, so we've set those delay times. It's a bit hard to tell. I just pull this down. You can see them slowly creeping up as we go along. And you should be able to hear the Haas panning effect. Let's have a listen. Okay, so you should be able to hear that the guitar is getting panned to the right-hand side. The reason for that is because we've put the delay on the left-hand side. And so we think that it's coming from the right-hand side. Let's have a listen to the difference between that and just standard panning. I'm going to duplicate this track again, and we'll get a pan version happening. Okay, let's listen to that. Okay, so there's a pretty big difference there. Let's have a listen to some longer delays. One thing I discovered in my own experiments with the Haas effect versus the panning method is that there is a very real difference between the results of each method. I feel that with the Haas effect, you are listening to the instrument inside a room, and then as the delay time increases, the instrument moves across the room in front of you. With traditional panning, however, I felt like the room itself pivots around my head instead of the instrument. To put it in another context, it is as though I turned side on to the instrument whilst it was playing in the room, rather than the instrument moving across in front of me within the room. I feel too that the instrument becomes smaller as it moves to one side with traditional panning, whereas the Haas Effect technique stays pretty solid in volume throughout its movement. This distinction between the two methods is important for determining which method you use. There really is no right or wrong answer as to which method is best. The timing difference between the two identical tracks will cause phase issues in the form of comb filtering. Appropriately, comb filtering is named for its look on a spectrum analyzer, due to its jagged, comb-like notch filters. These punch holes in the audio due to the phase cancellations it causes. This is a considerable issue for playback in mono, but to a lesser extent in stereo, as the tracks are hard panned, and so cancellations tend to happen between the speakers rather than on the sides. At the end of the day though, our auditory system is constantly interpreting phase and frequency differences in our daily life to determine where sounds are coming from, rather than purely detecting them as phase or comb filtering issues. So personally, I think if you can hear it, then it really comes down to a judgment call for you to make based on the sounds you're working with. I suppose the main point to take away from this is that comb filtering is a static event in this case, rather than a dynamic one, like a phaser effect for example. Because of this, it's a lot less audible. In terms of the actual losses from the effects of comb filtering, they are predictable and consistent across the board, with losses beginning at the top of the spectrum and working their way down as the delay track time increases. For those of you who are keen to add back the losses with EQ, I've worked out the cancellation points for each length delay. Just note that overuse of the Haas effect by directing a strong focus to every instrument in your mix causes nothing to be the focal point, because everything is now the focal point. You want to create depth by using it only on selected instruments, so I'd say pick 1 or 2 instruments only for best results. As a last tip, if you divide your stereo field up into segments, I would suggest that you could use panning for the middle, hard left and right instruments, and the Haas effect for everything in between. That's where I feel that the use of these techniques is most effective. Hope you guys got something new out of that. Have fun with it, and feel free to email me if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for other tutorials you'd like me to cover. And please subscribe for future video releases. Till next time, happy mixing.